All right. Well, welcome, guys. Welcome to session 5 of the History Discussion Club. So today we'll be going over a very interesting concept called the Thucydides Trap, and we'll be using this concept to analyze the road to World War II. So basically, we'll have like two PowerPoints today, two presentations. One will be on Thucydides Trap, which was made by me, and the other was basically just everything you need to know for Cambridge AS lead up to World War II. Yeah, so basically, two birds with one stone. So would definitely recommend checking out the podcast because there are some valuable stuff that we will be going over, like lots of important stuff. And yeah, subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's growing.
Like and subscribe.
Yes, like and subscribe. Okay, so let's just go over the questions I sent you. I tried to be as creative as possible with the questions. So hopefully you appreciate the effort. So the questions is that we're going to go over is like just basically what is the Thucydides trap? Who coined the term, and how would you define it? The second is how would you consider the Thucydides trap? Is it like a purely ideological term or a purely historical concept, or both? Third question is how would you?
I think it's both.
All right, thanks, Siva. Third question is how would you apply the Thucydides trap to assess the growing tensions between Britain and France leading up to World War II? I hear echo, but that's okay. Fourth question is, through assessing Chamberlain's policy of appeasement, hopefully you guys know about that, to what extent would you agree with the statement that history teaches us moral lessons, and those who do not learn history are doomed to repeat it? So there's some good scholarship history preparation. Fifth question is, use historical moments leading up to World War II to analyze the motives and attitudes of political figures such as Chamberlain, Hitler, and Stalin. Evaluate whether they were preparing for an inevitable conflict or whether they were still trying to pursue peace. Do they plan for the short term, the long term, or both? All right, okay, so that's a lot of questions. Hopefully you guys thought about that and did some research on the Thucydides trap. But if not, that's okay, because I'll be going over a short PowerPoint that I've made about the Thucydides trap. So I'll now share screen. All right, yes, the Thucydides trap. Yep, so that's the term. All right, so does anyone have a definition for the Thucydides trap? Gideon, I know you know because we've been talking about that recently. So does anyone else know what the Thucydides trap is? Like, does anyone
I sort of searched it up yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
So it's basically when a new power like sort of contests an existing power's like control or influence, there's always conflict or war, something like that.
Yeah. That's a good start. Does anyone have anything else they would like to say?
So basically, it's the theory that conflict will always arise between a rising power and an established power.
Yeah.
So something like an established power like the United States, current in modern days, and the rising power of China, right?
Yeah.
And it comes from how Athens was rising in ancient Greece, and that kind of scared the Spartans.
Yeah. Some very valid examples. So when you search up the Thucydides trap on Google, you'll see that it's basically just America versus China, inevitable war. So that's not really like how you would define the Thucydides trap. Is like that's only just like one example of like the Thucydides trap. So yeah, China versus US is definitely a case of Thucydides trap. But yes, it's like this inevitable conflict between like a rising power and a current power. And so I think I had a definition for it. Oh God, I can't really see. Okay, so basically the Thucydides trap looks into the power dynamics between an existing current hegemony and a rising power, and analyzes the diplomatic relationships between the two, and also like the underlying undercurrents between the two, especially in terms of economics, cultural influence, and I believe military power. Thucydides trap states that when two nations fall into this trap, they will inevitably lead to a conflict, which is war. The current hegemon, I don't even know how to pronounce that word, fearing for its loss of power and dominance, would challenge the rising power not only to stop that nation's rise and development, but also to dismantle it completely, to like eliminate this threat of taking over. And so this term was coined by an American political scientist called Graham Allison when he was like in a TED talk, was talking about like the current state of relationship between the United States and China. Yep. So
wasn't it in a book as well?
Yes, he did write a book as well. Yes.
Yeah, like War something like. I don't remember it, but it is his book, and apparently he coined it in there, right?
Yeah. I think Destined for War. That's the book. Yeah. Good point. All right. Let me just like move it because I can't really see anything in Discord in the background. Okay, so now I think it is important for every term that we like consider the origins of the Thucydides Trap. And so you guys would have never guessed this, but the concept was actually named after a historian called Thucydides. Like mind-blowing, right?
Whoa. It's literally named Thucydides.
Yeah, I mean, like you guys would have never thought about that, right? So it's just mind-blowing.
Arguable.
Okay, so some background about Thucydides. So he was an Athenian general who fought during the Peloponnesian War. So he was famous for his historical account of the war. So he basically recorded like pretty much the entire war, which he like wrote in a book called The History of the Peloponnesian War. So he's also considered the like father of history and political science. So he was like one of the first people to like ever write a historical account. And also like he had like strict adherences to impartiality and evidence gathering, and also like the lack of references to I can't read that word, intervention like divine deities, I should say. So like references to like God or like supernatural forces or stuff like that. So you guys know how like whenever you read like some ancient sources or stuff, they'd often refer to like some like I don't know, supernatural forces or something like that, like especially when you read the Bible or something, right?
So he was like secular.
Yeah, I would say so. Yes. Which, I mean, I wouldn't agree with this statement. Like when it says like the strict adherence to impartiality and evidence gathering, I wouldn't agree with this. Which leads me to my first question, which is, you know how Dr. Eddie talks about like you should never use the word bias because everyone is like subjective in some ways. Like if we sort of flip the question and say, is it ever possible to reach 100% objectivity?
I think it depends on like the amount of disconnect from the person and what he's trying to achieve. Like if you give someone for example a judge who doesn't know like a person who's on trial, he would be more objective than a judge who knows the person on the trial.
But that's still not 100%. We're talking about 100% here. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I feel like that's close to impossible.
Because think about it. The judge is still going to be. Yeah, exactly. It's just no. So the answer is no.
Yeah. So is it ever possible? Is the question.
Nah.
Probably not. No.
Yeah, I would agree with you guys. I'd say like it's like never really possible to reach 100% objectivity. Basically, whenever someone has like an account or something, they'd have to first understand like a concept first, and like their understanding depends of like their own like personal beliefs and all that, like the personal reasoning and the logics they have to go through. So there's always like some ways like in which they have like their own personal elements and like their own reasoning and interpretations to like a concept or something. So while historians will try their best to strive for objectivity, I believe that like no one is like perfectly objective. That is my opinion. Would you guys agree with that, or?
Yeah.
I think that's true, but not all historians do strive to be totally objective. Actually, what historians often do is tell you a story, and then interrupt the storytelling to talk about what they think. And in those moments, often they use the first person to emphasize the fact that they are interrupting the narrative, which might be a bit more objective, to offer a personal opinion, but that in itself is slightly deceptive, because the narrative the narrative can't be objective. The narrative is based on highly selective version of the story.
Yeah, so it's about like lenses and like what you focus on in the story. So like a historian, like they take like certain pieces of the narrative. They can't like take out everything. So they only like narrow in on like certain things which they think is important or has some relevance to it. And so that would be some subjectivity to it. Yeah. Does anyone have anything else they would like to say about objectivity?
How does it relate to Thucydides?
How does it relate to Thucydides? We'll get on to that soon.
Okay.
So this is just like a bit of like the concept first. Okay. So well Thucydides was like the general who like wrote about the Peloponnesian War, and okay, so now let's move on to like the concept itself. Let's analyze the concept itself. So do you guys think that Thucydides Trap is like a purely ideological term or like a historical concept? What do you guys think?
I think there could be an argument for both, but I think in its context of being made, more of an ideological thing.
It's more an ideological thing. I think to a certain extent, everything can be classified as ideological if it has like some significance or importance. That's just my opinion. But historical, does anyone like know what things they need to satisfy to make it a historical concept? I did some research on that, and so for a historical concept, obviously it needs to have some historical significance and importance. So for example, Thucydides is important because it documented a very significant event in history, which was the Peloponnesian War, and that was significant. I think it was also it's also important to classify a historical concept as it needs to be continuous, so it needs to reoccur in some ways throughout history. So basically, if we go back to our definition of Thucydides trap, it's like a situation where there's always going to be a rising power challenging a current hegemony. And like if we go to this table that I found of all the case files of like the different times in which this was the case. So for example, Portugal and Spain in the late 15th century, the rise of Napoleon in the like late 18th and 19th century, and also like all of like the world wars when Germany tried to challenge Britain for like world dominance. Those are all different cases of Thucydides trap. So it's sort of like history repeating itself in a way. So I feel like for a historical concept, it needs to be significant so that it can be like evolved to a certain extent to fit into certain timelines and certain contemporary periods, but it also needs to show some continuity in which it repeats itself to make it a historical concept. Because do you guys sort of like get what I'm saying about the historical concept? A historical concept.
Yeah.
I think the term is quite a recent term, isn't it? It's only been around for 3, and it was obviously used to describe a very contemporary situation.
Yep.
But its value as a historical term relates to its your ability to apply it to other contexts and to apply it to historical examples.
Yeah.
And from what you've presented it very neatly, and you've obviously found some other examples which would suggest that it is possible to apply it relatively easily to other historical examples. I think the question would be not whether it's possible to apply it to other examples, but how useful is it to apply it to other examples?
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that as well. Yeah, so one question that I want you guys to focus on later on is like, is it like legitimate? Like, is it useful to like use a philosophical concept to like try and analyze like a modern situation? So is it legitimate to apply the Thucydides Trap to analyze the tensions between America and China right now? That's something that you guys might want to think about. Yep. So those are all like the naturally like some evidence to show that the Thucydides Trap did actually repeat itself. So you could consider it as a historical concept, but also on the other hand, you could also consider it's not, because you can just consider it like this as like a natural coincidence in a sense, and like historians trying to like find like implications of like similarities between what was the original concept and what was the current concept. So it might just be coincidence. That could also be an argument. I'll now like to move on to like some description of the Peloponnesian War. The example the comparison I'm gonna use is the Peloponnesian War and World War I, and there's like some really obvious parallels between the two. So the Peloponnesian War, there was like a conflict between Corcyra and Corinth. Both are like
the city-states.
They were both states, and they were like very good in the sea. So they were like challenging each other for like maritime dominance.
Naval dominance.
Sorry, yeah, naval dominance. Sorry. And basically, when a conflict erupted between Corcyra and Corinth, Corcyra turned to Athens for assistance, and Corinth turned to Sparta for assistance. And you can sort of see how that's like one of the boiling points of like how conflict inevitably happened. Is like the conflict of Corcyra and Corinth is like completely unrelated to like the two major powers, which is Sparta and Athens at the time. But like they provide like the necessary catalyst for like a conflict to actually occur. And that was similar to like the Balkan crisis. Like while it was not like a conflict between Germany and Britain, the Balkan crisis inevitably like sparked World War I to occur. Yeah, so that's one of the parallels. The second parallel is the Megarian decree and the Potidaea crisis. So you guys definitely don't know what they are, I'd assume. So I'll just briefly explain what they were. So if you look at the map here, unfortunately I can't see anything because, okay, I can move this. Good. Okay, so basically the territory in red is like Athens controlled territory, or like they have influence over these territories. And you see how like Athens, because they're like a really dominant in the sea, they could like secure all like the other outer sea ports and stuff like that. Whereas Sparta was like very like land dominant, so they couldn't really challenge Athens in terms of like naval battles and stuff like that. So the Megarian decree was like a response to an insult by Megaria. Basically, it basically banned Megaria from ever trading with like the Delian League. The Delian League being like all of the states over here, like in like the circle or something like that. So it would prevent Megaria and any of the Peloponnesian states, which was like Sparta and all that stuff, to trade with that. And so if this was so this was like very like it pretty much just challenged Sparta's hegemony like indirectly, because by bypassing Sparta's military dominance, they were trying to like economically cripple and like try and force an economic collapse of the Peloponnesian like states, because they relied on like the trading ports of all of the different like islands and stuff like that. And the second crisis, the second thing I want to talk about is the Potidaea crisis. So the Potidaea crisis was like it was like there was like a conflict brewing, and Athenians tried to like control Potidaea through like by means of force and stuff like that. Whereas Potidaea, they wished to be like related to the Peloponnesian, because they had Peloponnesian origins. But I think Athens forcibly like caused a civil war to happen, and basically try and like establish a government control and influence over Potidaea, and that was like another like aggressive move by Athens, which pretty much just prompted an inevitable conflict. So if we look back on the table, I guess like the Treaty of London is pretty much like what got Britain, like it was like the reasons why the current hegemony was justified in like going to war with the rising power. So like those two basically justified Sparta going to war with Athens. The Treaty of London was like the reason why Britain like gave the British an excuse to go to war with Germany in World War One. And so that's like the second parallel. The third parallel is like both the current hegemony, like Sparta, and Athens, the rising power, they knew a conflict was going to come, so they would like prepare like militarily and through like alliance systems and stuff like that, establish alliance systems to prepare for an inevitable conflict, just like Britain and Germany's naval race, and like Germany's pre-war plans such as the Schlieffen Plan, because they were anticipating that there's going to be an inevitable conflict. And finally, the final parallel is Sparta's ultimatum to Athens. The ultimatum pretty much said to grant the Hellenes to be an autonomous state. And also, this sort of parallels the Austria-Hungary's ultimatum to Serbia, and Britain's ultimatum to Germany in World War I. Yeah, so those are some parallels that you might want to think about leading up to like consider like the scope of Thucydides Trap, and like the conflict and the underlying tensions between them. Yeah, so do you guys have any other have you guys realized any other like parallels or any comments to the parallels between the two?
I mean, it's interesting to note, like, even with the hugely different contexts in which these wars occurred, that such a similar thing happens. It does give some justification to the trap being a historical concept.
Yeah.
And afterwards as well, I think the restrictions that Sparta put on Athens, the way that Athens and her allies were treated afterwards, is I think quite similar to how Germany was treated after World War I as well. And the
Athens lost the war.
Yeah, the restrictions on Athens, right?
Yeah. So Sparta, after the war, after the Peloponnesian War, they established 30 tyrannical governments on like all of the Athenian empires. So basically, Athens pretty much ceased to exist afterwards, right? And that's sort of like Treaty of Versailles of like how the French try to like suppress the Germans, I'd say, to never like be strong enough to rebel against the
they were pursuing a retribution, really, rather than justice, in my opinion, at least.
Yeah.
Well, it was justice in a sense, because France had been like made to pay like 6 billion francs? No. What's the French currency?
Yeah, francs.
It was an immense amount.
Yeah, like at the end of the Franco-Prussian War, it was made to pay huge reparations, and as an ultimate insult, the German unification was done in France, in the Versailles Palace. So, like, it was justice in a sense that, like, they get to suffer now, right?
Yeah.
I'd say the French got their justice by like forcing the German delegates to sign the treaty armistice like on a train or something, like or something.
Yeah, I mean, the loss of the war to the Germans was already humiliation enough.
Yeah.
And also the return of Alsace-Lorraine to France.
Yeah.
Ooh, yes.
Well,
you should have just followed the 14 points. Like, why would it say? And your mention of like the Franco-Prussian War was also, in fact, a Thucydides case file in which, where was it? Germany challenged France for like dominance in Europe, land power dominance in Europe. Okay, so that was like my final question. So I made you guys think about this. Do you think Thucydides Trap is a worthy model to depend on when assessing modern day conflict? I'll be right back.
Personally, I don't think so anymore. Like, the deterrence each nation has is so powerful that the potential benefits are completely outweighed by any risks.
Yeah, but a conflict can still occur. It doesn't have to be military, right?
Yeah.
You can still have like economic conflict.
I think
like competition.
I think Thucydides was a war, though.
Yeah, it was
like so it's not really.
But
I
war
guess
is like the ultimate conflict, right?
Yeah, I think arguably
that's what the Thucydides Trap is.
Arguably, we should be. I guess one could argue that the definition of what a war really is in the modern age has probably changed and has become more economic and more based on cooperation and other factors.
Right. And that's because of the deterrence that each country has nowadays, isn't it? As well as like the increasing reliance on like online digital exchanges.
Yeah, I would agree. Yep. I'd also like to add that I think we can't really use Thucydides Trap anymore because there's something called nukes right now. And nukes is like mutually assured destruction. So whereas before, like you can pretty much like have an all-out ultimate conflict between the hegemony and the rising power, and like you get a victor. Like if we were to like wage war now, there won't be a victor because the war would just be completely demolished, right?
Yeah, that's like a Pyrrhic victory. That's guaranteed.
Yeah.
You don't win.
Well, it's not even it's even worse than a Pyrrhic victory.
It's not a victory at all.
Because, like you die as well, so it's not a victory, right?
Stalemate. Yeah,
it's more like a
stalemate.
A pretty.
I think you both lose, right? So
yeah.
Right. Like nowadays, I think like the war is sort of fought between, firstly, ideologies, and secondly, like within the less developed countries. Like I've read a couple articles about how China has been like buying out land in Africa and developing, particularly because none of the other countries have a monopoly. That makes them increases their power drastically.
Yeah. So basically, China is like currently following Athens' footsteps, in which securing an empire to try and rival with America's current, I'd say, imperialistic empire in a sense.
That raises an interesting question, which you sort of hinted at a couple of times, which is that it strikes me that the nature of the hegemony would determine the nature of the war and the nature of the peace. So the British hegemony in the 19th century was an imperial one based on naval power and economic power. And so the threat from Germany was all the more serious because Germany's rise was in those same areas. The United States takes China's rise so seriously because China threatens America's power bases. America's much less concerned by the rise of, say, Brazil or India, which are also rising powers because the nature of their rise or the the ways in which their rise is manifested are not the same basis as American power.
Yep.
So the nature of the hegemony is what determines the seriousness of the threat, or the perception of the seriousness of the threat. And then you look at the way these states treat each other after the war, and you use the example of the Treaty of Versailles. Well, what was it that the British in particular were so keen to do to the Germans? It was reduce their economic power, reduce their naval power, and take away their empire.
Yeah.
So I think the nature of the hegemony is crucial to understanding the whole point. The other thing that you sort of hinted at is but I don't think anyone's actually addressed it yet, is the trap part. What's the trap in the Thucydides Trap? Why is it a trap?
It's a trap because when two nations fall into the trap, so when it states that there will be an inevitable conflict, and this is why
why is that a trap? Why is that a trap? Because if the rising power wants to challenge the hegemony of the dominant power, and the dominant power takes the bait and declares war, surely then the rising power has achieved what it aimed to achieve. So why is that a trap?
I think both sides lose something in that, and it's rare that you get a conflict where one totally wins. It tends to break down both powers.
Yeah, which she sort of hinted at, I think. And then the third thing, which is related to that, is the point about nuclear weapons. And I'm not convinced that nuclear weapons really have changed the world that much. There were similar fears about the potential of air power in the 1930s. The fear of the bomber in the 1930s after the Spanish Civil War was pretty paralyzing for lots of people. It certainly helps to explain Neville Chamberlain's attitude to war in 1938, 1939. And yet World War II still happened. Nuclear weapons have existed since 1945, but there have been wars going on almost continuously ever since then. It's not like America has been scared of fighting. So have nuclear weapons really fundamentally changed the world?
I think they've stopped large outbreaks of war. Perhaps the small instances still occur, but large full-on land-based invasions don't really.
We haven't seen a global conflict on the scale that we're used to.
Yeah.
I think they stopped America directly fighting Russia, but it doesn't stop America fighting Russia through a proxy.
Yeah. So there's been lots of indirect fighting between the two powers, but there's never been this all-out conflict between the two powers. So using the Soviet Union and the Americans during the Cold War is one of the good examples, which shows the exception of the trap, because they never ended up in a full-out conflict. And why I was about to say why it's a trap, because none of these nations truly want to have a conflict with each other, but they're sort of forced into this because of all of their ties and what would it mean if they lose their power and stuff like that. But also there's lots of exceptions. There's a few exceptions to this trap. And one notable one that I wanted to talk about was America overtaking Britain after World War II. Why was it that Germany was such a big thing that the British wanted to put down, whereas America they sort of just allowed it to happen?
It's dependent on the situation. For example, between the United States and the United Kingdom, they did both have war plans if a war broke out, but with the advent of the Great Depression and all that followed, it didn't seem like neither side could really mount a war on each other, and there was no real point.
Yeah, I would agree.
Well, this is early 20th century. So isn't it right after World War One? So wouldn't it be more that the United Kingdom just came out of a war and they didn't want to really, like fight another war.
Yeah, you're right. I think the table is wrong. I think it forgot to include one, but you guys would agree that British was like the power during, like, in the beginning of the World War II, and then like America was the dominant power after World War II. But why didn't like a conflict break out between those two?
Well, America was like a pretty dominant power by the end of World War One.
Not during the start of World War II. They were like economically still.
Wouldn't the US
they were pretty high
definitely be the largest economic power by the end of World War One?
They were.
Yeah.
The UK were facing struggles in their global empire, and India and everyone else had
pretty much just
problems.
depression.
Yeah, but the thing is, like, after World War One, they went into isolation.
Yeah.
They didn't really use their power.
Yeah, so they wouldn't be considered a global power, like not the global power, maybe a power, but not the one. Would you guys agree?
The issue is you can't really have one global power in that kind of atmosphere when there's lots of powers who choose not to act. So like with the US, didn't they have like 20% of the global trade, which is huge, and you could argue that they were the global power, it's just they weren't influencing others over that period.
I think in the context of war and between like Britain and the United States, like all-out war, it just didn't, like, there was definitely a good chance that it could have happened, and again, like with War Plan Red and all that was going on between them, there was a significant chance that could have happened, but as some others pointed out, that the United Kingdom was already facing struggles after World War One. It was suffering from it, but also, America didn't want to be involved in any wars either, and America decided to kind of withdraw from the global stage and weren't really interested in any wars, even if they were, both Britain and America were prepared in case it happened. Neither of them really wanted a war.
I mean, other than talking about the power balance, you could say that the United States and the United Kingdom don't really have an interest in fighting over each other. I mean, they're so culturally connected. They're both, well, in a way, more like democratic and liberal, sort of, if you compared to aristocratic Russia and
communist China.
Not communist yet, but as in they're so intertwined and like together, and that's just not in their interest just yet. Like, they're fine working together. So
and also there's a whole ocean between them. Fighting a war on that
They're
scale
really
would just be a pain. Yeah.
And you would like America is like the natural successor of Britain. Like they're so closely related. Like America's like so culturally related to Britain, apart from like all the other like nations.
And they weren't really getting into the way of each other either. I mean, as in they weren't really arguing over like Europe or anything, because they're really far away, and America's focusing on their economy. They're isolationist.
Yep, and as long as Britain paid back their debt, America would be fine.
Yeah, exactly. Like basically, how to be the hegemony of the world is basically just join in late in the war, like reap up the benefits and.
Well, I think with Britain and Germany, their interests were all very much in the same place, and Germany wanted an empire, and Britain were not happy about that.
Yeah.
But America's way of getting an empire didn't really interfere with Britain. So.
And also, Britain were completely bankrupt after World War II, so they couldn't really like challenge America anymore, right? Okay. Well, that brings me to an end to the presentation of Thucydides Trap. We have a bit of time left. Siva, do you want to do your presentation on World War II?
Hello all, Roger here. Congratulations for making it to the end of this video. So that was a video on the Thucydides Trap. If you guys liked it, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and leave a comment down below. If you guys would like to learn more about the Thucydides Trap, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, and be sure to check out our next upcoming video on the road to the Second World War. Bye for now.